As we said at the top of the hour, Donald Trump's lingering presence, despite his loss in 2020, is impacting just about everything in politics. And I feel like we're all living it and then some. There are now two politicians who have seen more of a boost from Trump's continued time on the political stage, I'd argue, than President Biden and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, both of whom are seeing their political fortunes prosper by essentially being seen as the Trump alternative. Joined now by my panel, Asma, Khalid, White House correspondent for NPR, who's just come back from Florida, by the way, on a campaign reporting trip, Juanita, Tolliver, NBC News political analyst, Brendan Buck, former communications advisor to House Speaker Paul Ryan, and NBC News senior national political reporter and a Florida-based reporter for us, Marc Caputo. Hello, all. All right. I'm going to do, before we get into sort of a national conversation, you cover Freed and Crist all the time. You've seen them back-to-back before. What'd you make of them?
On this show or on the campaign trail?
Yeah, no, I know what you think of the campaign trail. Listen to our podcast, and both you and I go off on this phrase. But what do you think of what we saw?
I mean, the reality is Charlie Crist is more polished when it comes to this stuff. Mm-hmm. But Nikki Freed, I think while she's a little more hearsed in her answer, has more of that kind of raw, non-politician energy that she gives out.
She seems to have found her sea legs. Is it too late?
I don't want to say too late. You don't want to forejudge a Florida election before it happens, but she needed a lot more money a lot earlier. Florida doesn't have election day. It has election days. Yeah. It goes for 30 days, and the preliminary polling had showed she was trailing by those early ballot casters by double digits because she wasn't on air.
And Charlie's been running for statewide office for so long, he knows how to do that.
Right. I mean, since I had like brown hair.
Yeah.
He's been doing that. You know.
Asma, you just were in Pinellas County.
Yep,
and used to be Pinellas was the be all end all. It's not quite. It's a little
Congressional
more.
maps have been redrawn, right?
Exactly. What did you take away? What did you learn?
Yeah, I mean, I went down there in part because you look at polls and it seems like everybody is highly focused on inflation and the economy, and so I wanted to get a pulse of how that's actually translating. And one of the things I found out is I think folks are definitely very frustrated, both Republicans and Democrats, by the economy, but I don't know that it's the primary motivating factor for how many folks will vote. A lot of people are angry on the right and the left. We could talk anger, I think, for different reasons. Yes. But Democrats around reproductive rights. From Republicans, I heard a bit about Mar-a-Lago and the FBI raid. They are really motivating people. But look, I think ultimately we hear so much about inflation in polls, but I think the economy is somewhat of a baked-in proposition at this point.
All right, let me go to the larger thesis that I threw out here today, Brendan. I just think when you just look, Joe Biden's not in politics without Donald Trump anymore. He was retired from politics. Donald Trump essentially got him out of retirement and into the White House. Ron DeSantis was an unknown member of Congress who showed up on Fox News every once in a while. And then Donald Trump came along, and now he's if Donald Trump gets hit by a bus tomorrow, it's DeSantis as the front runner.
DeSantis is a bus driver.
The question the question I have, though, is Biden's worst days are when Trump's not standing next to him. Yeah. How will DeSantis look when Trump's not there?
Yeah, well, I buy the proposition that Joe Biden benefits from Donald Trump being on the stage. I think right now, Ron DeSantis has been pushed aside recently by all of this. I mean, certainly the raid in Mar-a-Lago has rallied Republicans behind him. And Ron DeSantis has this unique ability so far to be Trumpy, but without really putting his arm around Trump. And it's hard to do, and I commend him for being able to do it.
Do you think this Mastriano decision is a smart one by him? Because I'm with you. I've been impressed how DeSantis can somehow be Trump adjacent and have people like you and others who don't like Trump going, I like this DeSantis guy.
It's because he acts like he's the leader of the party. He ignores that Donald Trump is actually the leader of the party, and he says, okay, well, there's a Republican running. I am the leader of the party. I'm going to help them get over there. And I think he's trying to build goodwill, and he certainly is banking on the sort of the far right to be there for him. I mean, every Republican right now is worried about the base, but he particularly is. So he's been very successful at it. Obviously, there are long-term risks associating yourself with an election denier like this, but so far he's managed to balance it okay.
And Juanita, look, I don't think it's an accident that the perception that Joe Biden is finding his sea legs comes at a time when Donald Trump is garnering the spotlight.
Garnering the spotlight and floundering in it, right? Investigation on investigation on investigation, to the point where the head of the Republican campaign committee is like, don't say his name. No one say his name. Stay away from him. He's toxic and he's bringing us down. But I do think that the reality check here that Democrats have going for them that we've seen over the past few weeks is passing consequential legislation. That's wildly popular. People tap into that. People are excited by that. People are going to feel something about that.
I mean, this is my criticism of the White House is they can't sell the politics. policy.
They are investing and selling it. That has been a long-term problem for Democrats, right? We can all concede in that reality, but they are investing in it heavily. The $10 million coordinated ad campaign that's going out to key states. Planned Parenthood making sure that abortion is front and center on voters' mind, knowing how that is a galvanizing, mobilizing issue. I think that investments are being made. So make sure that this drumbeat is hitting through November 8th.
All right, let me add to the skepticism, and it sounds like you're there too, which is, when have we ever seen voters reward? They don't vote to reward. They vote because
they vote out of anger.
You're so negative. So negative.
I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, look, there's also a bit of cynicism I heard from voters, especially on the right, who will say, well, look, is this bill or this law now actually going to really help inflation? And economic experts will say in the short term it's not going to do that. So it's a bit of a...
It's a good climate bill, but I don't know how that is.
Think about the message here where Democrats can say Republicans voted against capping insulin costs at $35. Republicans voted against climate mitigation efforts when we're experiencing droughts, historic floods, historic storms. All of that messaging ties in here.
I don't know that they're going to get rewarded, but Democrats were facing a crisis where their own party was just going to stay home in a midterm when it's all about turning out your base. So now they at least have something to work with. I don't know that the middle is going to, I don't think it's going to save the House, but at least they have something to work with.
Well, the other thing is, one of the things that caused Biden's collapse, outside of inflation, I know that's like, aside from that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln, right? Outside of inflation, outside of Afghanistan, there was this prolonged period of losing in Washington. The left was at war with the left, Democrats with Democrats. He notched a win. Yes, Republicans will tell you, oh, this is the most terrible bill in the world, blah, blah. But the reality is he came out of this as a win. Now, Trump's raid at Mar-a-Lago, or the FBI's raid at Mar-a-Lago, I guess we're not allowed to use the word raid anymore, apparently, whatever we call it. The FBI storming the gates.
They pay to sponsor this program without using raid.
But the reality is, that has kind of blotted out the sun. But in the end, Biden's got something to talk about, and he can say, look, I won this, we did something, here are all the goodies. Will people really feel it and reward him? I don't know. But he doesn't look like a loser.
No, right? and the climate portions, I mean, I will say this, a lot of his support has completely plummeted because of the support from young voters.
You know, it's interesting. I'm going to give away a little something from our poll that we're going to come out on Sunday, but this issue with Democrats just being disappointed in Biden, he's still under 80% job approval among Democrats. If he moves it to 85, his job rating will go to 45 without winning over a single independent voter.
Right.
And 45% is suddenly, doesn't seem, that's about where Trump was in 18.
And if Biden gets to 45, imagine how well Democratic candidates who are already outperforming him in polls at the local and statewide level will be positioned. They're in a great position right now. McConnell knows it. Trump knows it. Everybody running, expecting, who, let's be real, started the year really giddy about midterms because they assume Republicans have it in the bag.
And that's the other big headline that this poll's going to show, and I think it's obvious to everybody here. Brendan, we're headed for an unprecedented turnout. Right, you look at, and we just have seen it in raw numbers. Look at Kansas, showed you the animation on the abortion issue. But look what Wyoming showed us in the animation of supporting Trump. And you see these numbers in separate places. Women are more fired up about this election than men. Rural voters have never been more excited about voting. And it feels to be a Trump issue. Everybody's pissed.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. If you ask,
different reasons.
If you ask any Republican, they feel really good, but the one thing that they're nervous is, once again, Donald Trump is not actually on the ballot. And what does that look like? And so they have to find ways to fire people up, culture wars and IRS agents and things like that. That's the little thing that's in the back of their head, the one thing where they're not ready to spike the football yet.
Except the enthusiasm already seems to be there. I mean, the persuadables may be smaller, but they are still relevant here. And these are folks that really have vacillated back and forth, and they don't like any incumbent.
Right. Well, swing voters swing, right? But I think to Brennan's point, or to kind of answer an unasked question about DeSantis and Mastriano, that's about evangelical voters. It's not about Trump, right? Like, DeSantis is courting them with his talk about gender. Like, that's a big issue. And
but he's afraid of abortion. I've noticed he is, has he clammed up on abortion?
He's cautious. He's cautious about it. Yeah, I mean.
Do you think that tone changes if he wins re-election?
Oh, definitely.
So do I.
You watch the spring lawmaking session in a non-election year in Florida begins.
We're looking at 8 weeks.
Tuesday in March. Yeah, you watch what happens. Like right after, like it may be right, in November, late November, watch what happens.
But he does seem to be, Asma, aware that that's a bit of a rail that he ought to be careful with for his reelection.
He could push.
He is not pushed for it.
He hasn't pushed.
He's talking
right?
voter fraud right now.
Yeah.
That's what he's
No,
doing.
I mean, it's a 15-week ban. And right now, when I was down there, I interviewed an OBGYN who told me that, folks who are coming into clinics are really riled up. And they'll ask her, what can I do? And she'll say, vote, get everybody to vote. And so there is a sense that this issue, I mean, we saw this with Kansas, that Republicans are nervous, I think, about all right, total bans and what that might mean, or bans at conception.
I'm curious, Brendan, if you were a Senate Republican, how would you feel about Mitch McConnell saying what he said publicly? Were you supposed to say the quiet part out loud when it comes to candidate quality?
I mean, look, we've all been saying it, right? We've been talking about this.
We've had a Herschel Walker conversation for months, and it's not just Herschel we're talking about anymore.
Yeah, I mean, everything he said was obviously true. So, it's you get in trouble for saying what's true. Yeah, candidates matter. And he has long been someone who tried to get invested in primaries to get the right candidate. In this cycle, the Trump side just worked him and ended up with a slate that people he didn't want. It's probably going to cost him the Senate majority, and that's just remarkable.
Does that rally donors, or does that scare donors off, what he said?
It probably wakes them up, but it doesn't sound like they're short on money. Investing $28 million in Ohio, the money is there.
That's McConnell's money. Remember, the Republican Senate Campaign Committee pulled out millions in ad buys from Pennsylvania,
it's all McConnell's
Arizona.
Money.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, Juanita, if they're in Ohio, it does look like, by the way, the most interesting thing about DeSantis' schedule is that he's not campaigning with Dr. Oz. He is going to campaign in Ohio with J.D. Vance. He's going to campaign in Pennsylvania with Mastriano. And what that tells me is
he
that
hates crudités.
Well, nobody likes a good veggie. He loves a veggie powder, but not that. But what that really tells me is I do think Republicans are going to cut Oz loose.
Republicans said that in the primary. They said if Trump endorses Oz, then he's dead to us. That's what we're hearing from county Republican officials who are in charge of the mobilization on the ground, who are directly engaged with voters. And so this, no surprise that DeSantis is not touching Oz.
Well, not only that, I'm sure Mitch McConnell will say, you got plenty of money. You don't need us. You can write a check.
Yeah, well, that's one of the frustrations that some of the Republicans and the upper echelons had with Oz is you had an opponent who was literally in the hospital. And
what did you do?
What you did is you acted as if your campaign was in the hospital. Like his campaign didn't. Yeah. Well, we could make a Jersey joke. I won't because I'm from Florida.
Yeah.
But the reality is he did nothing at that point to seize the initiative.
Yeah.
And now a lot of races are decided this time of year. Who knows?
Asma, one last question about the White House. Do they really put Biden out there a lot? Or if Trump's going to be out there stumping the country, they say, you know what? Have at it, man. This worked for us in 2020. Why not do it again?
I mean, as of now, we hear that Biden's going to go out, right? We hear that the White House is real eager to sell this Inflation Reduction Act. It is billed. There is a sense that they think that this is a legislative win, and it's worth it to get the president out there. But I will say at the same time, there is no doubt amongst Democrats that their base gets energized by Donald Trump. And the more he is out that,
Brendan is right that they need Trump on the ballot to get Trump voters out. He is literally the definition of double-edged sword, though. Asma, Juanita, Brendan, and Marc, thank you. This was a great panel.